Excellent. Thank you, Haley. So this is going to be fun today. We're going to cover a few things, a few trends to start off, and then we're going to dive into some of the research that we're doing, and then we'll talk at the very end about some of the specific companies that we think are going to be the most active, exciting, the companies go into the rest of 2023 and into 2024. So that's who you're going to hear from today. Each one of these analysts has a group of companies that they are responsible for, that they know inside and out, and you're going to hear about those companies as we go through. Like I said, this is what we're going to cover, the different trends that are shaping the IT services, digital transformation, and consulting space right now, and how we think those trends are either changing the behavior of certain companies or how certain companies are positioning themselves to do better because of those trends. We'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity. We'll talk about decarbonization. We'll talk about forecasting that we're doing at the end of this year. And then at the end, as I said, we'll have each one of the analysts will pick one company that they will highlight and talk about, and we'll actually let everybody vote on who made the best case. So three things, we've been trying to do this lately to make it easier on these webinars in case you got a lot else going on as you're eating your lunch or whatever you might be doing, multitasking as you listen to this. What are the three things to take away as we look at the IT services and consulting space right now? These are three things that really jump out at us based on all the conversations we're having, everything we're reading and researching. Agility, above all, regardless of your scale. So we see a lot of vendors that have been finding ways to add scale in the last couple of years, a lot of vendors that are trying to adjust to a new kind of resource and talent pool. But no matter what, they have to remain agile, whether you're one of the hyperscalers or whether you're the 800-pound gorilla of Accenture, you still have to be able to move flexibly across the ecosystem. The second thing that we're seeing is that no matter what happens with the macro economy, we expect that the demand for IT services, the demand for digital transformation, the demand for consulting is going to remain strong. IT services in particular remains pretty much a utility. You got to keep the lights on, you got to pay your electric bill. And that's what a lot of the vendors we're hearing from are telling us, is that the demand is not slowing down from their clients. We look at it from the other side too. What are clients saying about their budgets and their spending priorities this year and going into next year? And what we hear, even when there's concern about potential global recession or even recession or economic headwinds in specific areas, we still hear strong demand. And then the last part is about being relevant to clients and partners. This is a challenge for a lot of IT services vendors and consultancies to understand what differentiation actually means. So many of these companies are so very much alike, and when you look at them in particular as a group, the India-centric players, the big four management consultancies, it's easy to see how they're all kind of just the same. So in order for them to stand out and to be different to their technology partners and to their clients, they have to find that way to, a word that I think is vastly overused, but differentiate. And differentiate really is about, as we understand it, being relevant to your clients and relevant to your partners. Not different in when you look in the mirror and think about yourself, but different when they think about you. So those are the three big things to take away, and these are the three things that we're going to talk about today. These 5 trends is what we're going to start off with. And with that, well, here they are. The 5 trends that are emerging now and shaping 2023 and beyond. Automation now and artificial intelligence soon. Boz Christoph is going to dive into that. It's exactly what it sounds like, the demand for and the reality of the impact of automation across IT services now and where artificial intelligence is going to take us soon. There's been a lot of change in pricing models with outcomes-based pricing increasingly in vogue. I'm not sure in demand, and I'm not sure at scale is really happening, but certainly a change in the way that vendors price their engagements. We'll talk about the ecosystem and the criticality of strategic technology partners, but also niche vendors, the ability to partner across the broadest possible ecosystem. We'll talk about managed services as a way of getting into consulting, which is the exact opposite sort of flow path that we're all used to from all these years in this business, where we saw consulting as the quote-unquote tip of the spear. Now we're looking at managed services as a way to come back in, sort of a backdoor approach to IT services and consulting. And then lastly, the one that I'm actually going to talk about is knowledge management imperatives, how critical it is to be able to ensure that not only your clients and your partners, but internally, everybody knows what you're bringing to the table. What is it, the strengths that you have? Where are the different capabilities and offerings that you've been developing? And being able to share that internally, share that externally, and manage your knowledge, manage your IP, manage your knowledge management ecosystem. So with that, I will hand it over to Boz, who's going to tackle the first one. Boz?
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Just to kind of orient you to that graph on the slide there real quick, this is coming from our digital transformation voice of the customer research. It's a global survey, and we ask enterprise buyers what are the technologies that they see being impacting their digital transformation programs. As you can see, we have highlighted here, analytics and artificial intelligence are ranking up pretty high, and that has been consistent over the last couple of years and increasingly kind of climbing up through the ranks over the last couple of years. And it's probably not surprising given the investments in the technologies, given the opportunity those technologies present for both the vendors as well as the enterprises. But we see that 2023 as being kind of the year of really providing the runway and the opportunity for the vendors to demonstrate value around the investments within AI and really trying to be more demonstrating the value of the algorithms and trying to think about what does it mean to the enterprises and how does enterprise automation fit as it comes to digital transformation programs. So what do we mean by automation now, AI kind of like in the future or soon? The automation is when we talk about automation, really boils down to the kind of the cost optimization, the technologies like the RPA, intelligent automation tools that many vendors have used, and they are continue to use to optimize the service delivery. But on the enterprise buyer side, adopting such technologies is helping them to see where the inefficiencies are coming from, and it's something that enables them to driving some more cost-efficient operations. So it's an opportunity for everyone that's participating in the ecosystem to be having a more targeted conversations around ROI. On the AI side, really it's about thinking, what does that mean? How do we think about moving forward and thinking about reshaping the ecosystem of partnerships, especially as data and harmonizing process across the multi-enterprise business network can really benefit all participants as long as they adopt accountability and transparency practices, which often need to be backed by commonly adopted KPIs and incentive models. But we all hear about generative AI. Certainly top of mind. It's right in the hype cycle, no questions about it. But we believe that AI, in terms of the technology, is about how do you build the use cases, just like every other technology. So where those use cases will come from and how we'll present the opportunity for growth once, the enterprises are feeling comfortable with adopting automation and thinking about, okay, now that, we have automation established and have the analytics around the insights, how can we use the technology to actually not just cost savings, but also driving growth? So one area we see a really strong use case is the cybersecurity. It's really about, make it or break it area for AI and analytics, especially as vendors continue to package cybersecurity tools with cloud, putting really greater trust in the algorithms to scan and detect and monitor and manage enterprise IT operations environments, especially as fundamental issues like poor data quality and lack of privacy and skill shortages continue to persist. So it's an opportunity for everyone that's investing in those technologies to say, okay, now it's the technology has reached maturity. We know that down the road, analytics, just like cloud and most of the IT, will become commodity. What else can we do about it? Where are the areas that we can try to extract the most growth out of those new technologies, including AI? So more to come from our research in that particular area, especially as it pertains to both cybersecurity, as it pertains to the partnerships in the ecosystem that are shaping and enabling the AI and analytics space. But we certainly see it as a really both short-term cost optimization engine and long-term growth driver as well. So next one, please. So the next, the next set of slides again coming from the vendor, from the same research, the voice of the customer research that I just mentioned. It's around the pricing structure that vendors are adopting and vendors are offering and buyers are adopting, I should say. and it's Patrick alluded, it's outcome-based pricing is nothing new, but it's about thinking when and where vendors are pushing outcome-based pricing. Fixed price continues to maintain the lion's share in terms of the contracts, as you can see on the graph to the left. But outcome-based is increasingly kind of becoming an opportunity area for vendors to demonstrate trust, to take on the risk, and more importantly, the trust and the risk within their own ecosystem and how they actually think about who's going to be sort of the GC of the client engagement and who's going to be the subcontractor in the client engagement. So those are kind of some of the motions that we're starting to hear from both vendors and the buyers, and thinking about as those multi-enterprise contracts are shaped, the different commercial contracts are set, who bears the risk, who manages those relationships. And you can see on the graph on the right now, when vendors talk about outcome-based pricing, the majority of them are looking for cost savings. Outcome-based pricing to them means cost savings. The least buyers think about outcome-based pricing fee is associated with revenue growth. So it's about show me where you're taking the risk. That goes back to the point earlier about automation and thinking about those tools that enable you to drive those cost savings. So there's a lot of kind of a moving pieces. It's a gradual pivot towards outcome-based pricing. It's not the one-size-fits-all. What we're hearing is certainly technology in client areas like implementation, integration, and managed services are more of the areas where we see more of those contracts being adopted. But again, it's something that everyone has entertained and tried in the past, a little bit more on a one-off projects, but now it's becoming more of there's a new ways of doing business. There's a lot of talk around simplification. There's a lot of talk about partner ecosystem evolution. So those outcome-based pricing contracts will become the enabling vehicle to push the envelope, and it's kind of like basically force vendors to think differently, be more creative about their staffing and their pricing mechanisms with their technology partners, with their services partners, and so forth. So a lot more to come in that area from us as well, but it's an evolving trend that we'll be hearing and talking about for a while, but I think we're starting to see a little bit more of an inflection point coming up soon. So interesting to look next.
Thank you, Boz. And our next trend is around the need for teamwork, really strategic and technology partners for IT services vendors. We're seeing partnerships really being an essential element for IT services vendors' business models, because they're trying to gain access to specialized capabilities and technologies without having to build such technologies from scratch, because they're expert in services for the most part. And this is really important in areas where technology standards continually evolve, such as in AI and cybersecurity, for example. So we're seeing multiple vendors augmenting their partner ecosystems over the past year or so, because they want to increase solutions value. And some of the vendors that have historically been less open to partnerships are now investing in establishing a stronger ecosystem. And one such example is IBM Consulting. IBM overall as a company is shifting from being historically closed and largely relying on IBM technology products and solutions to being a company that's much more open to partnerships. This has been a really strong initiative over the past more than a year for IBM, spreading across the business segments. So changing the way IBM thinks about partnerships and establishing an alliances organization within IBM Consulting to better identify joint opportunities for solutions development and expansion positively affects IBM Consulting's revenue growth. While IBM as a company is one of IBM Consulting's strategic partners for technology solutions, I want to note an important fact that IBM Consulting pursues a client-first mindset. So essentially, when selecting partners for joint solution delivery, it's always open to working with a broad range of technology partners if the IBM solutions that come from IBM are not the right choice for talent. So it's always a partnership model, but with a client-first mindset, finding the best solution for the client. Partnerships can also help vendors display capabilities in areas of strategic focus. TCS, for instance, achieved the compliance and privacy distinction in AWS security competency, demonstrating the company met AWS standards for delivering consulting and managed security services. We're also seeing vendors lately establish preferred partnerships, such as a recent partnership that was announced in November 2022 between Atos and AWS. It's an extension to an existing partnership in which the partners signed a global strategic transformation agreement that enables Atos customers that are existing large-scale ITO contracts to speed up their workload migrations to the cloud, essentially by Atos becoming an AWS preferred enterprise cloud provider, while AWS designates Atos as a strategic partner specifically for ITO and data center transformation services. So there's a preferred partnership specifically in ITO and data center space. We're also seeing vendors increasingly pursuing joint efforts with partners and helping out build the vertical-oriented offerings to address specific business pain points. One such example is a joint venture between XL2. The joint venture is called XL2, which is an organization between Capgemini and Audi in the automotive space to enable digital transformation in the automotive industry and provide consulting and technology services for cloud and SAP S/4HANA solutions. With this, I want to turn it over to Kelly for the next trend.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you all for joining. So the trend that we wanted to call out here was managed services as an entree to consulting, and kind of thinking of it overall. Originally, as Patrick had mentioned, it was more consulting leading into the more managed services type of opportunities, but it's kind of switched a little as the managed services our capabilities have expanded. It's kind of changed. And so managed services are serving more as a pull-through for additional consulting services as they're uncovering additional opportunities that may not have been seen prior to the use of the different services, the different technologies, and using the managed services to piece together different parts of the organization, different groups of talent, just bringing it all together in a different way and kind of showing either gaps or kind of holes that require that consulting mindset to solve. Firms and vendors will definitely need to ensure that they're able to maintain the people to support engagements and that they can deliver on those specialized skills that can hone in on the client's needs, particular to managed services, but then also to follow through on what exactly they can do to sustain that, to sustain operations, but also to achieve either a certain goal or to reach certain milestones. Well, traditional consulting staff are building the technology knowledge and technology skills. It's definitely becoming more necessary to help them guide the client discussions, but then also to fit in and to follow up on those managed services so they're able to understand what's happening and kind of respond to it in that sense. So they do need staff that can understand both sides of the business, both the consulting and then also the audit and tax side, which is one of the primary drivers for the consulting firms when looking at the managed services engagements. Partnerships are also a core piece of how they're following through on this. So partnerships with technology vendors to grow their platforms to develop additional skills that are aligning with managed services is increasing. So consultancies are partnering more around portfolio innovation and expansion, primarily focused around industries, as well as looking at sustainability, AI, and cybersecurity. A lot of the vendors are using these partnerships to dive deeper into the larger scale platforms, some of the different technologies that are helping them to deliver on more complex needs, such as around engineering, some of them within digital, and kind of just using that ecosystem to deliver more closely on the managed services, but then also to flow through into other business areas or client needs. Transformation has been the underlying driver for managed services, which is helping to kind of whittle through and just kind of keep the conversations going and moving along. The tax is one of the main drivers for a lot of the consulting firms, but we're also seeing needs around compliance, regulatory, as well as just different business segments and strategies. So when looking at the managed services, it's kind of flowing through from that, and so starting in one spot, but then also such as tax or audit, and then moving into just different areas. Some of the more emerging areas that we're seeing some of the managed services needs around is around risk, business resiliency, as well as supply chain. And again, this is all underpinning the client strategy, so it's becoming more necessary to combine the managed services and the consulting to ensure that the strategies are properly adapted and evolved to respond. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to John to provide a little more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So kind of using TCS as an example here, it's known for its application outsourcing, managed services, integration, and more often now it's also its software as a service solutions. And that's still largely how it's seen in the market, but it's been putting a lot of money behind and a lot of resources behind its consulting offerings to be able to kind of expand the width and the breadth of its portfolio. But when it comes to consulting, it's been most successful with its existing clients. The SI and the outsourcing work really has kind of provided that entry point because the company is already building out the market awareness of its capabilities, and it's gained the trust of the buyers in those areas. And it works with them. TCS knows their clients, the business, the IT architecture behind all of it. And that, in some cases, makes it a natural fit to fill into an IT advisory role. So really, it's kind of the reverse methodology from some of the upmarket and management consulting peers and other consultancies, where that is really the consulting is kind of the tip of the spear for them, and instead using the trust that it can build through managed IT and business process services to be able to move up the value chain. And I'll hand it over to Patrick now, moving on to the next slide.
Excellent, thank you. And I do want to add one other thing on this. So we've done more special reports on managed services, on value-added resellers moving into the consulting space. So if you think of managed services as part of that entire value proposition, we did one recently on CDW and how they're moving into the consulting space, the IT services space. And we're increasingly seeing vendors like that trying to make that kind of move. And I think it's fascinating because they do bring in something that John just said. It's sort of a natural movement for them, and it's a natural discussion for their clients to be looking to them as vendors who know their IT architecture so well and understand what their buying patterns have been and understand what their technology needs have been, to then take that next step and say, okay, as you begin a transformation or as you continue a transformation, how can we help you with that and providing consulting services? So recommend, if this is an interesting topic for you, there have been a lot of special reports from us just in the last year covering the space. So go to the website and you can find those pretty easily. So this last trend that we want to touch on is knowledge management and sort of the criticality of getting knowledge management right. And this is not new. It's kind of like the outcomes-based pricing. It's something that's been around for a while, but I'm always amazed by how often we hear that it continues to be a real challenge within a lot of the companies that we work with. The large IT services vendors, the large management consultancies still struggle with this in their own way, and to varying degrees, of course. And so we think there are some sort of foundational aspects of knowledge management. It has to be centralized. It has to be curated. The ones that we've seen that have worked well have had kind of what I guess I would call a two in a box, like a librarian and a business practitioner. It's not just a matter of being able to create content that's useful from a business perspective or understanding what a company brings, but you actually have to have somebody that can curate that can make sense of it, that can make it available in a way that's easily accessible to the rest of the enterprise. the vendor. So, and then one last thing, of course, is a multitude of sources. I think one thing we've seen with knowledge management is it has to have more than just one voice, more than just one source. What can go wrong? We've seen underfunded knowledge management efforts. We've seen knowledge management that isn't global. Within a global enterprise, a global IT services vendor, or a global management consulting firm not actually having a knowledge management system that reaches all four corners of the globe and therefore does not bring to the folks that are operating elsewhere the use cases, the lessons learned, the opportunities that can come through a better globally managed knowledge management system, and then not managed and sustained. I mean, that's another thing that I guess is tied to being underfunded. So then we think, all right, what are some of the best practices? What are some of the characteristics that we've heard of very solid, well-run, well-managed knowledge management, high-performing knowledge management? One, I think, is when we talk about sort of, well, leadership has to be investable, what does that mean? I think a big indicator can be when leadership contributes. When we see that the leadership at a firm or the leadership at a company is actually contributing to the knowledge management, contributing to the content, and contributing to how that content gets shared, is amplified within an organization, that shows that that leadership values it, and that's totally critically important. A second thing is multiple media forms. So whether it's blog posts, or whether it's special white papers, or whether it's podcasts or video vlogs, whatever those are called. I still don't like that term. The multiple media forms is great. The consistency and the quality is what's most important. As long as you're not getting a very different sort of too surface level or too techie or whatever, depending on which media form you go to, as long as there's a consistent quality, that's super important. And then the last thing I would call out is it really does need to be open and available across the broader ecosystem. So, we often hear IT services vendors and management consultancies that tell us stories about how their clients didn't know that they did something. Like, well, we didn't know that you had capabilities in this. We didn't know that you offered that. That's a lack of a lot of things, but it includes a lack of well-run knowledge management where every single person within an organization can speak to all the things that an organization does and extend that to the ecosystem so that your partners actually know what you do, so that your clients actually know everything you do. So we think this is one of those things that's not going to go away. It's an important, I guess the trend I would say here is that we're back into a wave where the IT services vendors and the management consultancies that we're speaking to recognize the importance of this and are beginning to reinvest in and recommit to how they manage knowledge internally, and I think importantly, how they extend that to their broader ecosystem. So those are the five big trends. And now we're going to dive a little bit into some research areas that we're expanding in 2020, continuing and expanding into 2023. I'll talk first about cybersecurity. So we're going to launch a cybersecurity market landscape in October. It'll be focused on 10 to 12 of the largest IT services vendors, as you can see there. I want to say a few really important things about this. This will be 100% a TBR approach. So that is, we're going to start with the vendors that we cover, the IT services vendors and the management consultancies that we cover. We're going to take our understanding of their cybersecurity businesses. We will keep that, and by understanding, I mean the strategy, the performance, and all that. We'll keep that within the context of the rest of their businesses. I think the easiest way to explain that is we're not going to look at Accenture cybersecurity practice in a vacuum. We're going to look at Accenture cybersecurity practice as part of the larger Accenture. We will dive into strategy and performance. We'll assess go-to-market. We'll assess alliances and acquisitions. We'll look at resource management. And then by looking at each of the individual vendors and all its different components, we'll then examine some trends and some outliers across those vendors in order to paint that bigger picture of what we're seeing in the cybersecurity space, cybersecurity services space writ large. So right now we're thinking of funneling the vast range of security services into 4 buckets: strategize, transform, defend, and respond. Although, to be honest, our thinking is already starting to evolve on that, where we're looking at those first 2, strategize and transform, as perhaps being too blended together already to be fully separated. So certainly welcome any feedback on that as we begin to formulate our research around it. And we will be looking at the role of technology and pure play partners in the space. So all of those, that vast ecosystem of pure play cybersecurity companies, we will be looking at them, but we'll be staying focused on the key IT services vendors and their relationships with those pure play technology partners. So we're going to be looking at, again, Deloitte, UI, KPMG, PwC, IBM, all the rest of the very big players in the IT services space that we are already covering. We're simply extending our coverage more comprehensively into cybersecurity. And now John is going to tell us a little bit more about what's changing with the decarbonization market landscape. John?
Thanks. Yeah, so quickly going over what to expect from decarbonization this year. Our first iteration was launched in August 2022. It's an annual landscape, so the next will be this coming August. And kind of just to go over what it is, it's a report under our services practice. It covers IT services vendors and also consultancies and their efforts to support carbon emission reductions for both themselves and for clients, really through the lens of IT and consulting. And we provide analysis of broader trends in our executive summary, as well as the details and the assessments of the vendors themselves along two tracks. The first being the kind of internal commitments and the actions, such as setting net zero targets, training their employees on best practices, and the second track being the services and the solutions that are offered, such as strategy, climate risk assessments, software integration, green IT. We started with 13 vendors, adding a couple for the next iteration. But overall, it's going to be a similar look and feel to the cybersecurity and the innovation center market landscape that we have, and really is aimed at just addressing, for this iteration, some of the changes over the last year and how decarbonization still fits into vendors' broader go-to-market strategies.
Excellent. Thank you, John. So one other thing we want to talk about in terms of our emerging coverage is forecasting, something we've been reluctant to do in the services space for a while now, but Boz can explain what we are going to do.
Sure. I mean, forecasting when it comes to services, again, we took a little bit more of a services approach, and instead of doing a market forecasting, we started doing late last year and we'll continue to this year vendor forecasting, largely because of how we built our analysis based on the vendor knowledge, within the understanding of the data and the vendor performances and so forth. So what we have here on the slide is an example of what we mean by vendor forecasting. We developed a vendor forecast, and that's for Infosys specifically. We've done for a couple of more companies so far, Accenture and DXC, and we have another list of vendors that are coming up in 2023, including HCL, Capgemini, IBM, Cognizant, Wipro, Deloitte. And it's really in a collaboration with our data team. What we did was we brought in our knowledge of the companies, as industry analysts, and their data knowledge and data engineering skills, building in the models. I'm not going to read through the methodology to the right. I'll let you guys read that on your own. But in a nutshell, when we have those analysis and those forecasts, it's really about understanding and portraying what do we mean by the data. So I'll give you a quick example here for Infosys. We expect, based on our forecast methodology, that Infosys will likely grow at a little bit over 8% CAGR from 2022 to 2027 and reach $26.5 billion in revenue. With that range expected to the lower and upper confidence intervals, all things being equal, projecting between 22.7 and $31 billion. So this is kind of like the language that's thinking around when we talk about vendor forecasting. Where Infosys lands within this range will largely depend on its ability to capture a wide array of new opportunities and navigate through the upcoming, obviously, headwinds without getting distracted by the noise and pressure the company may experience due to the new contenders in the market. So it's really about thinking about where the company's positioned today, how it evolves. So a best case scenario of reaching $31 billion, it's a really tall order for Infosys, given the fact that just in 2021, they were $15.6 billion. So that means a doubling in revenue over a period of 6 years. There are three potential scenarios that could help the company reach that $31 billion. One is the company pursue a large-scale bolt-on acquisition, obviously, in either a product engineering services or a consulting space. The second one is if the company wins several mega deals similar to the size of Daimler that the company won in late 2020, which was north of $3 billion. And third scenario that could help Infosys really explode in growth is capitalize on its early investment in OpenAI, if and when the technology company pursues an IPO. So these are kind of the scenarios that we are running as we're thinking about the investments in the company position. The worst case scenario of reaching $22.5 billion is if Infosys drifts away from its core value proposition and try once again to sell either software licenses or try to really get into the management consulting space through an organic means, which essentially will distract the company and jeopardize the quality and what the company is known for. So again, a lot of data that we have from historical perspective, a lot of data engineering skills from our data team, but also it's all wrapped around our company knowledge. So those vendor forecasts are a good way for us to think about how some of those large vendors that we track on a quarterly basis, what's the impact in talking about the vendor forecast instead of a market forecast, which can often be a hit or miss, just to be honest. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks very much, Buzz. I think that's exactly the way to think about what these vendor forecasts are going to be. The upper range, how do they get there? The lower range, what's going to keep them from getting to success? So with that, we'll go into the cage match. It's time for the Mortal Kombat section of this webinar. And so we're going to have each one of the analysts present who they think is going to be the most talked about, the most exciting, the most disruptive, the most the most interesting vendor through the end of 2023. We don't have a time limit on this exactly, but I'm going to say 2 minutes, and then I'll cut you off. So first up, I believe, is going to be Alitza talking about Atos, and then Kelly will get the new EY. So Alitza, you're up.
Thank you, Patrick. So yes, Atos is one of the companies that has been transforming over the past several quarters. The plan for Atos is by the end of 2023 to split into two publicly traded entities because it's looking for ways to unlock value for clients, for its employees, and for shareholders. The two entities that will emerge after the split will essentially have the freedom to design their own strategic direction, which is in line with the trends in each market that each of the two entities operate. The goal is to be able to stabilize growth for both entities and improve profitability. So Evidian, the first company, will use its expertise in digital and big data and security and position as a digital transformation partner that utilizes technology expertise, notably in cybersecurity and as well as high-performance computing. The new Atos that will emerge after the split will use its infrastructure and workplace capabilities and pursue opportunities in the managed infrastructure services and digital workplace and hybrid cloud services. The two companies are the entities which are now together in Atos are going through transformation now. So Evidian will take a $400 million investment in growth and margin acceleration in the next 3 years to further develop its portfolio and resources and to effectively compete with established vendors in digital, big data, and security. The new Atos, which currently comprises of weakening and low profit activities, will go through an investment of $1.1 billion in a turnaround initiative in the next 3 years to be able to streamline its portfolio and to establish specialized expertise in the managed infrastructure services space and effectively compete with other managed infrastructure services peers that also recently emerged, such as Kyndryl, which is a very similar story as the new Atos, but a year ago it split from IBM and now is operating specifically in managed infrastructure services space. Kelly, over to you.
Thanks, Alitza. So looking at EY, just a quick overview. The potential split overall, since it was announced, it's definitely had its ups and downs. But overall, the outcome will definitely shake up the management consulting landscape. Currently, I believe the EY split is on pause. They're kind of taking a step back just to figure some things out. But looking at it from the top, EY's consulting business would go public and provide tax, business advisory, and technology adoption services, while the remaining legacy EY will continue to deliver those audit services. So the main point or the main drive for the split was definitely to remove that conflict of interest between the audit and consulting side. But the main challenge they're facing is around their partners and just kind of figuring out how to piece everything together as they move forward. Some of the challenges that I think will definitely weigh into the outcome of the split, and also things that could create opportunities or not for their peers, such as their competitors, is around the branding. EY will definitely have to start back at the beginning in terms of building up that brand and reputation to compete for some of those engagements. While they do have the relationships per se, they still need to kind of just rebuild themselves and ensure that they can create that market perception. The other challenge that they may have to overcome is around their countries and how some of the different member firms may not split and some might split. So it could create some challenges in terms of collaboration and kind of working across different regions. Their partner ecosystem will also experience some changes, which could create some ruffles for some of its peers around how it can deepen its technology landscape by working with firms that they couldn't before, or technology vendors they could not before, such as Amazon Web Services. In terms of looking at its peers and competitors, it could create some opportunities for them, as EY, as I had mentioned, will need to rebuild its market presence, and it will also be kind of at a disadvantage from that perspective, but also looking to build out those assets while addressing its liabilities. The talent landscape could also create an issue as it seeks to retain, but then also recruit some new talent to support the different areas in the regions and technologies it's looking to grow. Something interesting to call out that I think is worth noting about EY, it is not likely that the other big four firms will follow along and split between the two. So it could set EY apart either for the better or the worse, as it will have access to clients that its peers more or less don't. It can work with its audit clients, its tax clients on the other side. So I think it does create an opportunity for the firm, but it also could create a step back for them as they are rebuilding and starting over back at the beginning. With that, I'll hand it back to Patrick or to John and Boz.
All right, John, you're up.
Thanks. So I'm going to quickly talk about one vendor that really continues to perform pretty well and compete across the landscape, which is TCS. As you can see here, we have them coming in around in between 40 billion and 31 billion by 2027. But really, they are a competitive threat, not just because of their size, but they're a threat for companies across the landscape, including all the way up to Deloitte and down to Kyndryl. Even if it's not directly head-to-head, they are continually in the mix, largely due to some of it with their scale, but also their pricing agility and awareness in the market around both their legacy and emerging capabilities, such as analytics, AI, and now even moving into quantum, which is really increasingly enabled by their partnerships with cloud vendors. The cloud platforms and cybersecurity have been some of the biggest drivers for the company. It's fueled SI and managed services workloads for them. And of course, they've launched some cloud platform business units with Azure, AWS, and Google that have also been really driving those strong services and also IP-based revenue growth, as they really are continuing to put more and more of their homegrown software and solutions on those partner marketplaces, which is really an important piece of the puzzle for them. That's what TCS can kind of bring to the table for those partners. It's robust, it's industry-specific software and solutions. Banking has been a very large area for TCS, around about 30% of its business. And similar for platform, partners, but also retail is a really good example where TCS has built out a strong reputation around its retail software, and getting those available on a platform like Azure as well as AWS, but specifically aligning with Microsoft and its Microsoft Cloud for Retail, kind of targeting that industry cloud play is compelling, and it's mutually beneficial. And it's a way to go to market and target those specific use cases while consolidating its own strengths and those of its partners. And on top of that, I think TCS's consulting capabilities are also earning some mind share, primarily with their existing customers, but they're still evolving that value proposition overall in a very interesting way. And that's not to say that they're without threats. There are smaller companies that are finding gaps. Tech Mahindra is one of those smaller vendors in our benchmark. It can't compete with TCS everywhere, purely based on size and scale and some of the deep relationships it has with like SAP and Microsoft, but it can fill the gaps in the areas where it's really highly skilled. And so Tech Mahindra has focused very heavily on IBM Cloud. It's worked closely to become more of a key partner. It's made IBM actually a platinum preferred partner. And it's also a good opportunity and timely for Tech Mahindra because IBM has been, as Elisa was mentioning, relying more and more on those independent SIs for services and more willing to engage in those areas. So kind of as the differentiation begins to diminish between vendors around their Azure and AWS and Google business units, there are still some gaps waiting to be filled around for more niche providers that can kind of provide an edge if it's right for the customer. But lastly, going back to TCS, they still don't have that permission to play in the broader management consulting space, but they certainly have some strong competitive advantages in their hands that will support continued traction in the market, going from their IP, their scale, and also their pricing agility that really makes them a very compelling vendor, even in the event of a macroeconomic downturn. And if buyers are becoming more price sensitive, they're still going to be one of the threats across the landscape, really, no matter what competitor we're looking at. So I'll hand that over to the other behemoth, Accenture, for Boz to go over.
Thanks, John. It's exactly that. It's the battle of the behemoths. I think it's which essentially will become really the case, especially in 23. Thinking about where Accenture has been, how they've evolved their go-to-market value proposition, pivoting from a kind of industry-aligned P&L to geo-aligned P&L. Their relationship with key technology partners that really have helped the company to build a household name status. So for Accenture, yes, they are the kind of like 800-pound gorilla in the case in terms of the scale that they have and the presence across the ecosystem. And I think that's going to be even more important in this year because when it comes down to buyer sentiment, they are largely looking for cost optimization, and managed services is a key component of that value proposition. Accenture has the scale. It has the tools, not just the people, but it has the tools of automation tools and automation-enabled platforms that are enabling accelerated service delivery, lowering total cost of ownership. So on top of having the kind of IT consulting value proposition that the company has led the way, the biggest disruption that could come from Accenture is really to use the opportunity of its integrated scale and what we talked earlier about using the managed services component to drive some consulting along the way and bring in the value and elevate the value of Accenture technology and Accenture operations more in the forefront in terms of the discussions and using the insight that generate from the managed services to feed the front of the machine. So can Accenture do that? They have the people, they have the frameworks, they have the command and control culture that could possibly execute on that. The challenge that they could face is just becoming too big and just sidelining some of those pieces that are important to the execution that the company is known for. But in terms of being, it's again, essentially good at what they do, and many buyers know that. Their partners know that. They're aware of it. It's about continuing and extracting the most out of the current market environment, and managed services will be that piece of the puzzle that while some may look and say, well, Accenture is becoming a large Indian-based outsourcer because almost half of its workforce is based in India, true, but it's also have enough people on site and on shore that are able to manage those relationships, the knowledge management Patrick talked about earlier, the partner ecosystem that partners look up to Accenture to forge relationships, both large and small vendors. So will continue to maintain its kind of a number one presence because of the scale and overall growth in the market.
So now we're going to see if Accenture maintains its number one in the hearts and minds of the people who are attending this. So here's your chance to vote on who made the best case or who you think is going to be the most interesting, most talked about vendor at the end of 2023. And while you're voting, I'll add a couple more that you can't vote for, but the things that are on my mind. One is McKinsey. And I think what's most fascinating about McKinsey is we might make it through 2023 without a scandal. We could have scandal-free in 2023 for McKinsey, which I think would be fantastic. It's been almost 2 years now. It'll be July when it's 2 years with the new guy in charge, Stanfield. I can't remember how to pronounce his name. So I think he certainly has righted the ship, and we'll see if they can make it through the entire year without any kind of front-page New York Times scandal for McKinsey, which would be great for the firm and I think terrible for everybody else because they are already a strong competitor, and it just makes it even more difficult to compete with them when they're not competing with themselves. And then the second area to keep an eye on, and I mentioned this already, but I think it's so critically important to understand how the ecosystem is going to change because of the way that value-added resellers are encroaching on, increasing their capabilities in disrupting, however you want to phrase it, the rest of the IT services market, including the consulting space. So I think keep an eye on those value-added resellers and keep an eye on a scandal-free in 2023 McKinsey. So we'll get to the results in a minute. I just want to share with everybody, this is the coverage that we do here at Technology Business Research. This is our IT services benchmark that Elisa is the lead author on with contributions from everybody on this call. And it covers all these companies here. You can see it's a very long list of IT services vendors. It's also a very long list of metrics. This comes out every quarter with a change every quarter, whether there's a deep dive focus on a particular industry or a deep dive focus on a particular geography. So look for that. I believe in the first couple of weeks of April will be the next IT services benchmark. We also have a management consulting benchmark, which comes out twice a year. You can see the companies that are listed there. We also do some very deep dive profiles on most of those companies that are on that left-hand side. And again, the metrics in this benchmark are very extensive to include revenue breakdowns by vertical, by region, by service line. And then we also look at a lot of key metrics across the companies as a whole. We're looking at how we evolve this particular benchmark this year, thinking about ways that we can think of strategy consulting and technology consulting in particular in slightly different ways. So the last piece I'll talk about here is the digital transformation coverage. This is very much an evolving portfolio. We launched it 5 years ago, and we've changed it every couple of years. So we're in a change cycle right now for the digital transformation portfolio. So what you see here is what's on the board at the moment. It could change. We have that sort of latitude to make the changes that are necessary, and it reflects what's really happening in the digital transformation space, which is that every couple of years, a new thing becomes the most important thing, and the demand that our clients are hearing from their clients, that is the IT services vendors and the consultancies, the demands that they're getting for digital transformation, for iteration, for transformation, for whatever it might be, is beginning to change. So we're reflecting that in the way that we report on and analyze that part of the market. So with that, here we go with, hopefully, if the polling system worked, your results. So it looks like EY is not the clear winner. Atos and NVIDIA. Everyone is always fascinated by the splits, by the breakups. It's like the People magazine of analysis right there. I mean, everybody wants to know who's breaking up and why. I'm not surprised by that. Good to see TCS getting a little bit of love there as well. No surprise, most people probably think they know Accenture so well that it's not that really an interesting company. And fair enough, I think the challenge for everybody is keeping an eye on Accenture because of how much that company can change. We talked at the very beginning, one of my key takeaways was about agility and scale, and I think Accenture has proved to be still agile despite the fact that they are, really, we're now at a 1,200-pound gorilla, not just an 800-pound gorilla. Atos and Avidian is going to be fascinating as that company splits up. No doubt about it. It's going to create an opportunity for both of those smaller companies to be disruptive in their own way in the marketplace. And then EY, of course, is fascinating because, as Kelly said very rightly, I think, the other three are not going to follow along. So the path that EY strikes out now is going to be something new for the legacy Big Four firms, and I think an opportunity for them to prove, if the split goes through, to prove that they were right about the opportunity, the broader opportunity in the IT services ecosystem. And I think it's also an opportunity for the other three to prove that the partnership model still works and is still relevant and is still the best way to sustain a business and to provide that longevity, provide that sustained growth over all the years. So with that, I think we are completely done this webinar. So please reach out to me or to anybody else on this call. Let us know what you think. Haley, do I need to turn back to you? I need to turn back to you, or just tell them to take the survey. All right, take the survey, and this is available to download afterwards. So thank you all. Thank you to the entire team, and take care.